1875 in New York and since moved to India. Our speaker, Richard Smoley, will today be speaking about some of the teachers of our founders. And this should be a very important program for us. Now, we normally hold our public meetings of the Minneapolis group on Zoom. During the pandemic, certainly, we meet at 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time on the second and fourth Mondays of each month. And you can find us listed with the national site, and we'll be posting some links for you in the chat room, how to get a hold of us. So we have many upcoming programs, and I would like to briefly describe some of the upcoming programs after today. Our next meeting will be Monday, October 25th, 7 to 9 p.m. Central. And I happen to be the speaker. I'll be speaking on awakening the inner hero, finding the hero within you. We'll be talking about the classical arc of the hero's journey. We'll be talking about everything from Dorothy and the Land of Oz to the search for Ithaca and the Odyssey. And that should be fun. We'll be talking about awakening your own inner hero. So then in November, we'll be meeting November 8th, 7 to 9 p.m. here. And our special speaker will be Warren King, a healer, and he'll be discussing emotions. And I have some notes on Warren. He's quite an interesting fellow. I think you'll want to hear Warren King. He has practiced natural and Asian medicine for some 30 years. Warren King has practiced energy psychology for many years, also with the realization that childhood traumas will result in disruption in the energy bodies of a person. And in his book, Warren's book, The 5 Elements of Healing, Warren shows how the East has known about the emotional levels of the organs for millennia. So in his talk with us in November, Warren will share what he has learned about feelings and what can be done about their transformation into joy and enthusiasm for life. Warren is an old friend of ours. He's since moved away, but thanks to Zoom, we have him back, and we're just super delighted. Now, I would like to briefly introduce Teresa. Are you with us? There you are. Teresa would like to say a little bit about our fundraising, if you will.
Yes, we are a nonprofit 501c3, so every donation that you give, it's a tax write-off. We ask for $10 donation. If you wish to donate more, you're more than welcome to do so. And the link should be in the chat. So, and it'll go to Square, or if you want to send a check, you could do that also. But it's easy, it's quite easy to use the Square. I don't see that up there yet, so.
No, it'll be up here.
It'll be up there shortly,
yeah.
so.
It'll be a checkout Square, just press the button. And whatever you can do would be appreciated. We no longer are meeting in the Griggs Midway building in St. Paul, but we're here and we still have expenses. Well, it's now with great pleasure that I introduce our special speaker tonight. And he's a very special friend to the Minneapolis Theosophical Society because he's spoken to us before. He is a distinguished scholar and an author. He's the editor of our national magazine, Quest Magazine. And he is on the staff of the Theosophical Society in America National Headquarters in Wheaton, Illinois. Please welcome Richard Smoley.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you so much, Hope, for that meditation, which I thought was very beautiful. And I will do my best to remember it for my own purposes in the future. So the subject of tonight's discussion is the Masters and the Mahatmas. And as you all know, according to Theosophical history, H.P. Blavatsky and certain people in her circle had some contact, it is said, with these masters, particularly K.H. or Kuthumi and Morya. And Blavatsky even said that she met Morya in 1851 when she was traveling to London with her father to visit. They had a huge World's Fair in London at the time. And she said she met him then, a tall Indian. So I think you know all of that. I think you also know that there's a volume of their letters published known as the Mahatma Letters, and another volume called Letters from the Masters of Wisdom. The Mahatma Letters were written to A.P. Sinnett, who was an early associate of the Theosophical Society. Letters from the Masters of Wisdom were addressed to various other people in the early Theosophical movement. And I think you know all of that. I think you also know that Blavatsky and the other founders of the Theosophical Society felt they were very much under the guidance of these masters, particularly K.H., Kuthumi, and Morya, or M. They're usually referred to by their initials, in the creation of the Theosophical Society, and was guided in their particular, in its development. And now the question of whether people had contact with these masters after Blavatsky's death is sometimes controversial, but, and in fact, it was the cause of a break that was never really repaired in the Theosophical Society, in which one of the founders, William Q. Judge, claimed to have contacts from the masters very much like that of Blavatsky. And Annie Besant and Alcott didn't believe him. And they basically threw him out of the Theosophical Society. And he took most of the American section with him. A lot of it returned eventually, but there were groups that didn't. And there are many Theosophical splinter groups, as you know, that are basically the result of this. And they seem to be, as far as I can tell, far more a result of, shall we say, personal clashes than any real difference in doctrine or belief or practice. As you know, some of these are still around today. And to my knowledge, the Theosophical Society, Adyar, which we are a part, has cordial relations with them. And in fact, if you look at the summer issue of Quest magazine, there is a famous painting of the initiation. I think you've all seen it in one form or another in this magazine. And that is in the possession of the Theosophical Society Pasadena. And they were the ones who very kindly sent a high-res image of it with permission to use it. So as far as I know, our relations are entirely cordial. Nonetheless, it led to these splits. And I don't think I really need to go any further into the details of the master's history, because I think it's all, I think you're all long-standing theosophists and understand a great deal about it. You may know some details better than I do. But I suppose we have to figure out for ourselves who we think these masters are. And this is even a scholarly issue, because as you may or may not know, over the last 30 years, there has been a tremendous burst of interest in theosophical history in academic scholarship. The Jane Santucci, whom some of you may know at Cal State Fullerton, is one important figure in it, but and a lot of these theosophical historians or academic historians of theosophy are in fact based in Europe or somewhere else. So there's a huge amount written about this academically. And the scholars really don't quite know what to do with the masters. For example, did they exist or did Blavatsky invent them? Well, if you're a scholar, you are kind of bound to this rather rigid skepticism in which anything paranormal must be excluded as evidence. So your natural bias is to assume that Blavatsky just made it all up, while admitting that she herself did not claim so. And this leads to a kind of split in the academic world and probably doesn't help them see the early theosophical movement terribly clearly. Although it's mostly motivated by goodwill. I mean, it's not so much a matter of debunking or exposing, but a general interest in theosophy and particularly its influence in its first 50 years. Nonetheless, they're never really quite clear about what to do with this. And so you have a number of theosophists in the Theosophical Society who have a rather worshipful attitude toward the masters. That is to say, masters not only existed as human beings on the planet, but they are still, if they're still around physically or not, they are still in some ways in communication with the Theosophical Society, and at least some people connected with it. And that is the other side of it. Many theosophists hold those views. And I think one curious detail about the masters, as I see them portrayed, is an extremely worshipful attitude. And there is this kind of desire to view them as semi-divine beings and regard them with a certain amount of devotion. And some people are more like that than others. I would like to point to a little piece of evidence that may indicate the master's own feelings about this. Allegedly, the last letter written by K.H. to Annie Besant, which she received in 1900. So Blavatsky couldn't have faked it, or she did. She was a much more powerful magician than one might have reason to believe. And I did print it in a 2011 issue of Quest. And I have it up online here, so let me read a little of it. It's rather short. The TS must safely be entered into the new century, the 20th century. You have been some time under deluding influences, shed pride, vanity, and love of power. Be not guided by emotion, but learn to stand alone. Be accurate and critical rather than credulous. And it also says, we ask not for the worship of ourselves. The TS and its members are slowly manufacturing a creed. Are we to be propitiated and made idols of? Is the worship of a new trinity made up of the blessed M. Upashaka, Blavatsky and yourself, to take place of exploded creeds? We ask not for the worship of ourselves. Where else? The cant about masters must silently but firmly put down. Be silently but firmly put down. Let the devotion and service be to that supreme spirit alone of which one is a part. Namely and namelessly and silently we work, and the continual references to ourselves and the repetition of our names raises up a confused aura that hinders our work. You will have to, this is to Besant, you will have to leave a great deal of your emotions and credulity before you become a safe guide among the influences that will commence to work. in the new cycle. So there is at least some evidence that the masters themselves, and I think this is quite evident from many of the passages in the Mahatma letters themselves, were really rather suspicious of this kind of worshipful attitude that was being played upon them. So what then do I think about this whole thing? I'll give you my personal opinion. I believe that the masters were real people, men, who were in touch with Blavatsky and others. I don't have anything to say about the precipitated letters or other occult forms of transmission. I hope educated and open-minded enough to know that a lot of things happen in the world that ordinary explanations do not suffice for. So I'm certainly open to that. So I think I basically am willing, from my own personal point of view, to say that yes, there were these masters. They were in touch with Blavatsky and Alcott, and they did their best to propagate the Theosophical Society. I think it is mistaken, and I think they themselves said more than once in this letter, for example, that regarding this way is not helpful. And this brings up something I may get to later, but I personally think, perhaps against all theosophical beliefs, that although the masters were ahead of us, they were like 15 minutes ahead of us. They were not these omniscient, quasi-omnipotent beings. I think they were themselves on the path of the initiate, guided by still higher figures, of whom the Mahachohan may have been one. And in order for a person to strive and advance on the spiritual path, I would say, and I hope you would agree, that certain tasks are set them. And as part of the training of these particular masters, I mean, M and KH particularly, it was their job, in a sense, to like form and help work with this Theosophical Society. Now, if you've ever been to many esoteric schools, you will see that things are not really built all that well. Things are kind of jury-rigged and kind of, at odd angles. And, it's certainly, we're not certainly looking at professional work here. And I suggest that in an esoteric school, this is because they don't necessarily give a task to the person who knows best how to do it. They give the task to the person who has most to learn from it. And I was at an esoteric school in England 40 years ago, and they're putting this center together. And I was given the task of cutting carpet for one of the rooms. Well, I'd never cut carpet before, and I struggled with it. I botched the job, basically. And finally, they took mercy on me and had someone who knew how to cut the carpet come in and who did it in 5 to 10 minutes perfectly capably. So my point is that on the esoteric path, you may be given a task that is just a little bit beyond you. And I personally believe that the masters were given this task with the Theosophical Society. I believe that they were well-intentioned. I believe that they were certainly on a higher level than us. I think they knew more than us as ordinary people. But I think the task of forming and shaping this Theosophical Society was a task that they didn't always do that well at. I think it was I would even go so far as to say some of the mistakes were theirs and not Blavatsky's. And I think they say this thing various times or in various ways in the Mahatma letters. For example, it would seem that in the early 1880s, there was a certain use of psychic phenomena to produce belief. And this really didn't go too well. It didn't go too well for the very simple reason that it never goes well. It's just kind of a bad idea. It has all sorts of consequences that you didn't imagine. I even think of a friend of mine who's a Russian emigre. She looks like Madame Blavatsky. She has some of the same powers. She may even be related to Madame Blavatsky. The old Russian gentry was not that numerous after all. And I had warned her a couple of times, politely, that some of her health problems might have to do with some of her playing with these things, like, for example, telekinesis, of which I saw an example myself. And I wouldn't be surprised if Blavatsky's health problems had something to do with that. My point is not that these people were bad, stupid, or evil. My point is that they were, even the masters, very human beings trying to accomplish a difficult task. In the end, they actually succeeded quite well because whatever you want to say about the Theosophical Society today, a lot of the ideas that Theosophy has promulgated have now entered the mass mind. Everybody knows what karma is now. One thing that's always struck me, and this goes back in polls going back 30 years, someplace between 20 and 25% of the American population surveyed by reputable polls believe in reincarnation. When the Theosophical Society was formed, the only people in the West who believed in reincarnation were a few people who were really disciples, consider themselves disciples of Plato, who, as you probably know, taught the doctrine of reincarnation. So there was this tremendous success that this work brought about, and a tremendous transformation. But I think it's well for us to realize that these, and I mean the masters as well as Blavatsky, Alcott, and the others, were well-intentioned, sincere, striving human beings who didn't always do a great job, just as I don't always do a great job. You don't always do a great job. Who does a great job all the time? And I think this needs to be kind of brought into the foreground a little bit more. And I think this gives us a more rational appreciation of the masters. It avoids some of the things that that letter warned about, but it doesn't go into the extreme skepticism of Blavatsky made it all up. I think that is, for me, a sane and balanced attitude toward the masters. I will go on to say that there are, it would seem, people who claim to have contact with the masters to this day. I would presume on the inner planes. And this is something I simply can't comment on. If you have, it's not for me to say you haven't. Generally speaking, as I say in the editorial in the latest issue of the magazine, which is about teachers, although not specifically about the Mahatmas, if you have inner plane contacts like that, I think rule number one is keep your mouth shut about them as much as possible. To know, to will, to dare, to be silent. Ever hear that? So without saying that this is impossible, I'm saying that the people who blab on it about the most are the ones whom I'm a little bit more suspicious of. About the subsequent fate of the idea of the masters, that itself is a long study. As you know, in around 1920, Alice Bailey claimed to have contact with the master DK, who was a disciple of KH and M. He was kind of there, but kind of on the next rung. And this master DK dictated volumes and volumes and volumes of blue-bound volumes that I'm sure most of you have read at least a portion of, as have I. I mean, the idea of the masters then proceeded with Guy and Edna Ballard. And Guy Ballard, I think he was a lawyer or something, had an encounter with a master, was it KH? Maybe KH. Well, he was hiking on Mount Shasta in California. And these communications, according to him, led to the formation of what was called the I Am movement, which was at its heyday in the 1940s. One descendant of this is Elizabeth Clare Prophet's Church Universal and Triumphant, which again claimed to have contact. Now, one thing I think that's interesting to point out is when we're getting particularly to the Ballards and Elizabeth Clare Prophet, the term changes. Because now you're hearing not about masters, but ascended masters, meaning that, yeah, they're on the inner planes. They are not people we are going to run into on the street, even a street in the Himalayas. And that's an interesting thing in itself. It means that, these people are claiming more inner plane contacts. Again, it's not for me to either validate or invalidate those claims. One of my favorite esoteric principles is neither accept nor reject. And that has certainly saved me a lot of intellectual and even emotional pain over the years. I don't know. I know certain things have been said. I've read certain things. I don't really have to form an opinion. Who cares anyway? I think this attitude in itself would be very, very helpful, not only in esoteric work, but in day-to-day life. In fact, many people, I would say today, are upset about things they have no idea about. Yeah, you read one or two things in the news about X issue or Y thing, and you get yourself all upset about it. But I don't know how many times over the past decades, I was, up in arms about something I read in the paper, and years later I discovered it had nothing to do with anything at all. And I can't believe this is no longer true. So my point is to maintain a certain open flexibility of mind, which, if nothing else, will lead you to avoid getting into pointless arguments with other people. Unless, of course, that's your objective, but maybe that isn't such a good objective to have. So that is kind of a nutshell of the Mahatmas and their alleged subsequent history. Of course, there are other masters, and there has been this long tradition in the West of these masters and teachers who are just on the edge of visibility. You know what we know about Blavatsky's masters, and there are a lot of things we don't know. Rudolph Steiner, another major esoteric figure of the 20th century, had he had two teachers, an old herb doctor, this old man in Austria who was kind of an old-time herb doctor, and another more enigmatic Rosicrucian master whom he never said anything about. Gurdjieff, yet another major figure in the 20th century, alluded to the possibility that he had learned what he had learned with the Sarmon Brotherhood, an esoteric group in Central Asia, probably Afghanistan, but no one has ever been able to trace this. And many people have said, well, Gurdjieff said a lot of things that he didn't he didn't believe or didn't really believe, and he did love throwing people off track. But with all of these, we're seeing, and this is something that's really fascinating, because Gurdjieff himself at one point said, "I am small man compared to the ones who sent me." And we're seeing this pattern with all of these people, of people at a certain level who inspire, motivate, and guide figures who become really quite public, but who they themselves insist on being in the background. By the way, as I think you all know, the Mahatmas did not intend those letters for publication. Those are the Mahatma letters to A.P. Sinnett, right? They were for him alone. And as you can tell just by reading them, they refer to a lot of personal details and things that, because they're personal, are really of no interest to us. So you have this sense of these masters, these hidden masters behind the scenes, who are not necessarily invisible or on the inner planes, but who make a severe point of isolating themselves from the public. And I think that tradition goes back a long, long way. I think it helps explain why so many sacred texts are either anonymous or pseudonymous. That is to say, the person who wrote it attributed it to somebody else. Like, for example, quite possibly a good number of the books in the Bible. And I can, one famous example is Dionysius the Areopagite, who wrote these mystical Christian texts in the 6th century. They're attributed to Dionysius, who was a disciple of Paul's, mentioned in Acts, not mentioned otherwise. But from the style and thought, scholars do not in a second believe that it was written in the 1st century, but in the 6th century, because guess what? Greek changed over that 500 years, just the way English changed, right? If I wrote something in modern English and said somebody had written this in like 1500, yeah, who the hell would believe that? So there's always this feeling of behind the scenes, not wanting to be seen. In fact, the more advanced you are, it seems, the less public you want to be, the less you want to be seen. And I find this fascinating. I think in the first place, it has a great, it kind of at the lowest level, it has to do of making sure that the individual's ego is not involved. It's quite clear if you're totally anonymous, if you're totally out of the limelight, you're not doing it to be in the limelight. You are not hoping to be, the next celebrity. I think also, it could also be said, and you have your own esoteric experience to evaluate this by, but it would also seem that unseen influences are the more powerful ones. And well, it's just what that letter just said. We're trying to do things, but you're mentioning our name all the time is causing us problems. So I think we have to judge that from that point of view. And when I say judge, I mean it from as open-minded and tolerant and accepting a point of view as we really can have. I want to go on to another kind of level of this. And I hope you have all received your copies of Quest, because the mails being what they are, no one is too sure of that. I got my copy, a few days after it was mailed, but that doesn't happen to everyone, I've heard. And it's about teachers. And this is this is actually a Zoroastrian image on the cover because there is a long story about Zoroaster. And, but the core of it has to do with a couple of stories, first-person accounts written about one, this old Welsh Kabbalist named Glyn in London, who was a very eccentric figure. I knew him myself, and every detail in that article, which was not written by me, is, as far as I'm concerned, completely 100% accurate. Similarly, there is another one by Jocelyn Godwin, who's one of the most distinguished scholars of esotericism around. And one reason he's so distinguished, in my opinion, is that he actually does have some inner knowledge, as opposed to this external, as they say in the academic world, etic knowledge that many of the other scholars are limited to. And he had a similar teacher who's named Anthony Damiani, who taught a small group of people in the area of Ithaca, New York in the 70s and 80s. And the point is that these figures were, well, they weren't totally invisible because they did, actually interact with real people, but they kept themselves apart. They lived very, very humble lives. Damiani actually worked as a toll collector on the New York State Thruway. And they are kind of at the, shall we say, the next level down. They're people who are around, and, they have assembled certain groups of people around themselves, very idiosyncratic groups of people around themselves for very specific purposes. And the students go off and do what they do. Again, we're not talking about a religion, because whatever, in the cases I'm talking about, the organizations that were formed were very loose, and I would even go so far as to say perfunctory. So it's not about the organization. It's not about, it would seem to be about a certain individual at a certain level attracting kind of serving as a nucleus for a core of maybe 100 people at most, who come into their lives, little by little, come in and out of their lives. I think another individual who did that, and had I thought of this 3 months ago, I would have probably tried to get someone to write an article about it. But another figure along these lines is Alice O. Howell. I don't know if any of you are familiar with her. She was with the Theosophical Society. She was a very accomplished astrologer, and particularly on Jungian lines. And she lived in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts, and attracted this circle around her. These were not followers in any real sense of the word, but they were a circle. I was part of it myself, because I, by some coincidence, ended up living a mile or two from her, which way out in that countryside is interesting. And I think she too is one of those figures. Alice herself studied with a Rosicrucian master named M, who was called M. This was in New York in the 40s. I don't know that she ever wrote about him. Maybe she did somewhere. But he was a real man, and he kind of passed on what he passed on to her. Again, someone, and M was, again, a much more shadowy figure than Alice, who, Alice published books, and she had kind of a public and a following. So again, you're having this extremely obscure person who's really staying out of the limelight, and then this somewhat more public figure, and maybe eventually someone kind of ends up writing a best-selling book, and that's kind of the third level of what we're talking about. We could say, here's another example. at least perhaps as controversial as any, Castaneda's Don Juan. And I am sure that at least some of you have read some of Castaneda's books. If you had all said none of us have read any of Castaneda's books, I would be very, very surprised. And Don Juan was this Yaqui Indian who, again, kept in the background. As far as Don Juan is concerned, of course, there have been all sorts of claims and doubts questioning his authenticity as a real person. I will tell you what I know. I know this woman, she's an old friend, although I haven't seen her in years, named Heather Valencia, who was married for a while to the spiritual and temporal chief of the Yaqui Indians, to which Don Juan belonged. And I asked her once or twice about this, and I'll tell you what she told me, which is all I know. One is that she said the first of the Castaneda books was, shall we say, authentic and accurate. The others were more fictional. The other was that she said that she herself, at one point, lived in a house owned by Don Juan Matus. There. Now you have everything I know about Don Juan. So again, we're talking about a very figure in the background, and then this other kind of more public figure comes out and makes a splash. So we're starting to see this pattern of, you know, a subtle influence that starts to spread. And I think this is the way the masters work. I think that's the way they've worked throughout history. And this means that a lot of what is really happening, and I would say what is happening in the spiritual growth and evolution of humanity, takes place beneath any bandwidth that the New York Times is ever going to take notice of. This is in fact, I'll tell you one thing Alice said that M told her, that the future, the religion of the future, was going to be in small groups. And then he chuckled and said, well, you know what that means? You'll never know how many of you there are. And I think that statement could be considered prophetic, in that we have a lot of groups, particularly today, of various degrees of accomplishment, seriousness, and so on, who are off doing their own work, probably quietly, and not making a splash in the mainstream. And that's probably all for the good. Because, well, another teacher I know, Warren Kenton, a Kabbalist who wrote under the name Zev Ben Shimon Halevi, he's a good friend of mine, died a couple of years ago, said, you know, we're not working for the present. We're working for hundreds of years from now. And if you think about it, that sounds fanciful. But from another point of view, I think it makes sense, because you're all intimately familiar with the doctrine of karma. And you're all reasonably familiar, both in theory and practice, with how the doctrine of karma works. And I think, well, my impression is that what we have now, right now, in front of us, personally and collectively, is the sum total of the karma that's come in the past. So these are things that are already playing out, that in the short term, you can't really do too much about. Our task then would be to send out influences, however we understood that, for later generations and even later centuries. So the effects, the karmic circumstances they have to deal with are more positive than ours. And I think we can honestly say that we live in much better circumstances than people did even 100 or 200 years ago, despite all of the problems and whatnot. Didn't Blavatsky say somewhere that in the 20th century, first century, life will be like paradise compared to what it is now? Well, doesn't that sound strange? But hey, they were just around to getting to inventing central heating in her time. And I respectfully submit that however humble your circumstances be, you probably live at a level of what would be considered unimaginable comfort by the standards even of the nobility a few years ago, a few centuries ago. Here's a funny tale. It's a side detail that I'll throw in. I had one thing I did recently was write an introduction to a new edition of The Great Gatsby. And no doubt you're familiar with the plot, but well, it all ends in disaster. And the whole disaster starts when these incredibly rich people are sitting around in Long Island, and it's a miserably hot northeastern summer afternoon, such as I have had to live through myself, being a Connecticut native. And they finally decide, hey, let's go into the city. Maybe we'll go to a movie or something where it's air. You know, the idea that you would go into the city on a day like that, obviously is a sign that nobody is thinking clearly. My whole point is that even rich people didn't have the comforts that we have today. Well, you can go on about the environmental consequences of air conditioning and so on, and you know, there's all that to be considered. But you know, the karma that we live in is pretty good. And I've heard Tibetan teachers say, you know, you must have very, very good karma to have been born in this country. And of course, our duty, I would say, and I hope you'd agree, is that to hope that and work so that the karma of future people is even better. But it's going to work through perhaps subtle, little known influences rather than the mass movements that people are so desperate for. Those may be necessary too. And no doubt they are. I would suggest, though, that they're not always or necessarily in the line of esoteric work as we know it. My belief is that esoteric work looks and feels a little bit more like this. Whatever you do in the world or however you act in the world. And I believe that there are figures, both visible here on Earth, however invisible they try to be, and on other higher planes that are helping us along. And I think, you know, I think it's wise to be grateful for their help, and not only be grateful for it, but to continue that work as best we understand it. At this point, I think I'm going to end my formal discussion. And since we're actually kind of a small group, maybe it would be best if we just took a few questions and then people could break for the night. How does that sound? So, any comments, questions, thoughts?
And you'll need to unmute yourself, and you can. If you have a thought or a question, please join in. Don't be
Or
shy.
unless the group would like to take a short break now and come back for discussion and questions.
Well, are people tired?
Well, usually we break for recording, and we break for to allow people to go to the restroom or get a cup of tea if they like.
Well, we'll come back in 10 minutes then.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Right. Anybody speak up? Hi, Jennifer. I see you there. I bet you have a question, Christy. Teresa, anybody?
Well, I'll jump in and comment on Richard's excellent comments on Castaneda, because, you know, I've read the books, you know, And I've tried to defend the books, and I've tried to, honestly praise them. And there's really no way, except that I work for the publisher that was first presented his initial book to publish. And it was concluded that it was such a serious book as to only be considered the field work of a graduate student in anthropology. And for that reason, the publisher that I was working for refused it. And I always teased them because it became such a huge bestseller. I think that his book sold, 8 million copies in total. And then maybe that's including in foreign languages. But it's interesting that Richard said that that was probably his most legitimate book, because there were many stories that, and one was by Carlito's own wife, that he never really left their apartment in Los Angeles at the time that he was supposedly visiting in Mexico. I know many people who have met the three sisters, the three Donnas, and sadly they all died mysterious, tragic young deaths. So there's a lot of intrigue around this individual, this mysterious writer, Castaneda. And I think with all of these, from Alice Bailey through Carlos, it's like, I always think, if the message rings true, if it says something meaningful to you, you don't have to totally believe, everything about, the source of it, but did it deliver something to you? It stimulated you? Did it have meaning for you on a personal level? So, I don't know if Carlos ever made any of those trips. I suppose he made the initial trips, and he sat on the park bench with Don Juan, and he said, I'm a student from California, and I'm here to study the effects of hallucinogenic drugs on the descendants of the Yaqui Indians in Mexico. And he said, I'm going to blow your mind, young man, which he did. That first book probably was legitimate. The others were probably invented. And it's like, at some point I have to kind of wonder, how much difference it really, really makes.
Well, in my view, it doesn't, unless you're looking for allegiance. If you want have Castaneda as a flag that you salute, it starts to make a difference. Otherwise, it's as you say. There are gems in it. To tell you the truth, I've only read the first book. So whatever that says about, but through no particular reason. But as far as the three sisters go, well, what was Don Juan? He was a sorcerer.
Yes.
And what is one of the chief things you learn about sorcery, even from the one book I've read? That sorcery is really dangerous.
Right. Yeah.
I think, actually, I did read another book of his called The Art of Dreaming. But in fact, I thought I saw it in this book, and I tried to find it again later as I looked for it, but there was a comment that there were civilizations on this continent who destroyed themselves through misuse of sorcery. And you really have to look at things like the Cahokia Mounds and some of those enormous earthworks that were just not built by simple tribesmen or something like that. Where did they go? I think an archaeologist would not be able to tell you this, but there are, I don't know, maybe they did destroy themselves through these means. As you all know, it's said that is what destroyed Atlantis, that kind of misuse of power. So, but yeah, I think the idea is, if you want a flag, if you want something to believe in, you want something to, and particularly if that takes the form of a person, you're kind of vulnerable. And that was kind of been one of the problems of the guru phenomenon in the United States over the last 50 years. At Quest, I published a book by Lama Willa Miller, who is a Tibetan Lama, who is also an American woman. And I had lunch with her when the book was being published. And I said, well, it might make your book more useful if, you could mention a few centers that people could go to or visit for Tibetan Buddhist studies. And she said, I can't really do that because I don't know of any that aren't tainted by scandal. When I can think of a couple myself, there's no need to name names. But, if you've got this idea that I have my total allegiance, particularly to this person, any kind of mishap is going to, shake your faith.
Yeah.
Whereas, say, the Catholic Church is full of abuses, but even there, it's kind of admitted that these priests are deviants and whatnot. They're not objects of individual devotion. They're, just basically poor slobs like the rest of us, some of whom, as usual, do better work and do more good or more evil than others. But I think that question of a need to find that kind of allegiance is really the factor here.
You can certainly appreciate someone's insight or brilliance or inspired work or knowledge or lesson to share, and then have understanding and compassion that it's still coming through a human being. There's a lot of crazy, nutty people out there that have contributed amazing things. So, if you're not too caught up in the fact that somebody's not perfect and they're a human being and whatever's coming through them is worth it, then that allows you to enjoy and maybe ponder and chew on stuff that you would otherwise judge and not, because it comes from a human being.
Yeah, I think there's also a real need for many people more than others for devotion, a kind of bhakti yoga. And this devotion almost inevitably seems to have or need a personal quality, because you can have like devotion to Parabrahm or whatever, but it's not going to likely to do too much for you. And so when people think of devotion, it's personal devotion, and this manifests in different ways. Now, in the Western religions, which have a personal God, this personal devotion is usually placed toward God, or Jesus, the supposed incarnation of God, or Mary, the supposed mother of God. But these are all personally conceived. And in the East, there's less of that, but there's still a need for it. So even though there's a type of bhakti yoga devoted to Krishna, for example, and there are many devotions to the millions of Hindu gods that there are, there's also some kind of impulse in these religions to displace some of this devotion, this personal devotion, onto the guru.
Yeah.
And I think, in the East, it's fine because these religions have been there for millennia, and they have a cultural framework of how to see it. And I think there are a lot of Brahmin priests who are telling these families, oh, you need a real guru, and the families are sort of saying, yeah. But I think when those things were imported to the West a half century ago, that context wasn't there, and they themselves were not prepared for it. I mean, you lived in this monastic life all your life, and okay, you get a yoga center started or a Buddhist center started, and hey, it's 90 degrees out, and suddenly all of these gorgeous women are sunning themselves on your deck in their bathing suits. This can be disruptive. Has proved to be that, in other words, that cultural context really wasn't enough of a vessel to hold this, even though, of course, the inside of those religions have been extremely valuable and certainly a necessary counterweight to what Western religion has often become.
Richard, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Would you care to comment on Krishnamurti a little bit?
Yeah, I thought of mentioning him in the speech, but my view is it's a cosmic esoteric setup for a joke. And basically what happened is that these two people, Besant and Leadbeater, who had genuine clairvoyant abilities, saw this little boy, and they saw, shall we say, a very powerful spiritual aura in him, and they dusted him off, and probably basically botched his mission, because their idea of preparing him was sending him to like these British public schools, and sending someone to a British public school of that era is a good way of guaranteeing that there'll be a non-entity. Not that he was, but I suspect all of that education didn't help him too much. And they'd set this whole thing up, the Order of the Star. He's the vehicle of the world teacher. And here's the punchline, 1929. Okay, I'm the world teacher. Is that what you say? Okay, if I'm the world teacher, no more teachers. Go off and think for yourselves. And that was the punchline. And it was probably the punchline that not only the Theosophical Society, but much of the world needed to hear. So it was, and I think he was also kind of annoyed at being treated like this spoiled baby. And I think he, it doesn't sound like, it sounds like a very privileged childhood, but not a very happy one. Now, having said all that, I have known 2 or 3 people over the years who knew Krishnamurti well, even intimately, and they all had the highest amount of regard, respect, and affection for him as a person. So I am not in any way, and never got any impression that his integrity was at stake. I'm just saying that it was kind of a setup for this lesson that everybody needs to learn. Folks, truth is a pathless land. It's time to think for yourselves. That's my view.
Thank you.
I have a question. And I'm sorry my video is so dark, but I'm new to Theosophy. And one of the things along my journey that has really drawn me to Theosophy is the equal footing that men and women are on in a time where women were not encouraged to be intellectual. Women were not encouraged to be investigative about these things. I mean, Madame Blavatsky, just the amount of courage that she had to do what she did, to say what she did, to write what she did in that time period is just, it amazes me. And I just would like to get your opinion on the way in which and the importance of which women played in the early stages of when Theosophy was being founded, and what kind of influence you think that had.
Well, I think it had a tremendous amount of influence because, of course, two very strong-willed women were very much at the core of it. Annie Besant, who, as you all know, started out as an atheist and a social advocate, and shockingly, an advocate of birth control, which horrified the Victorians. And I had it. All I can say is it's had a tremendous role. You know, I'm sure some, if not all of you, know Tim Boyd, and Tim Boyd said he was talking to a professor of Indian history, and this professor told him that, from his point of view, Annie Besant was a more important figure in Indian independence than Gandhi. So, yeah, and I think, I mean, I personally take all of that equality simply for granted. I mean, I believe I've lived that way in my life with my male and female friends, so it feels perfectly normal to me. This is kind of related, but not, but you know, in 2011, the Theosophical Society of America elected its first Black president, right? And a year or so later, I said, you know, TSA elected its first Black president. Maybe I should have put something like that in the magazine. And you know why it didn't? It didn't occur to me. Of course we elected a Black president. What's the big deal? You know, it simply did not occur to me to even attempt to make news at it, because why would he even possibly care? So I think that part of the Theosophical Society, as you know, that respect for people, as you know, the first object says, I think, to my knowledge and my impression after 16 years of membership, I do believe that pretty much everyone I've ever met in the Theosophical Society has done everything to live up to those ideals.
Thank you very much. It's just been, I actually just watched your interview this past weekend with Mitch Horowitz that you did for Modern Occultism, and it just, the approach that both of you had to that was very thoughtful, and I really can appreciate the respectfulness and that you show, the respect that you showed actually toward Annie Besant and Madame Blavatsky and the role that they played. Coming from a Catholic upbringing, it's just so refreshing to see women given the respect that they deserve in the arena that they deserve it in.
Yeah, well, there are religions that require a certain amount of deconditioning as one leaves them, and this deconditioning can be really painful, can bring up a lot of painful moments, but I think I think one is better. I'm not a believer in organized religion as it is today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have a couple of local friends who are Protestant pastors, and get together and talk, and that's all fine. I just don't really feel the need to be drawn toward that. Because I don't, well, I don't know, maybe I just don't like getting up on Sunday morning instead of sitting around and drinking coffee.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. Again, I appreciate it.
I wanted to jump in with a question, and thank you, Christy, because I was thinking that too. I suspect the reason that we needed to have women bring forth the theosophical positions was because the feminine is going to rise. And that's part of the New Age, is the equalizing of the masculine and the feminine. In a way, Yeshua, that Jesus originally tried to bring forth that message, and I believe Paul was the one who sabotaged it personally. I think that, but you know, and I grew up Baptist, and so wow, the control of the Pauline Christianity was heavy on me, you know, growing up. So my question is related actually to Jesus for you, Richard. I you know, the masters, like the ones sort of in charge of the world, maybe, we hope, like Buddha and Jesus. Are you making a distinction between the master teachers who were human and then the masters who were the ones who religion got founded around? And I just wanted you to describe that for me a little bit. I was curious.
Good. Let me talk about the Apostle Paul first, because all of the things he said about women in the New Testament, he did not say. The epistles to Timothy, and I'm talking about conventional, reputable, academic New Testament scholarship. Those scholars do not believe Paul wrote the letters to Timothy. And then there's that thing in 2 Corinthians about women keeping silence in churches. Well, their view is he didn't write that either, that it was a later interpolation. And they will point out that if you actually took out the passage is irrelevant in that context. And if you actually take out that passage, the whole thing reads much more smoothly. So I don't particularly believe that Paul was the sexist he's been portrayed as, although I could see the good reasons that people thought so. And who's the head of the church in Rome when Paul was writing? It was a woman. Why? Because they didn't have churches then. They had house churches. Basically, they would meet in a rich person's house. And I mean, the woman is named in Romans, I forget it offhand, but she was the head of the church just because they met in her house. You know, they didn't have any of that stuff. And a lot of that has been kind of projected on them in the past. So, there's a whole history of dogmatics that can explain this, and we could go into it, but it would be probably very boring here, if nothing else. Now, the other question, well, I think Gurdjieff said something that said, you're really not able to evaluate the level of a master who's above you. And I think for all of us, we're in this position of, if you come across someone at a higher level, you can kind of recognize it. But beyond that, it's pretty speculative. I don't know anything about, Alice Bailey has this world hierarchy of the Christ. I don't know, Sanat Kumara, I don't know. I don't have any direct experience of it. Again, neither accept nor reject. So again, I think these great world teachers were at a level higher than us. I think it's possible or conceivable that they are, shall we say, still operative in the world. But I wouldn't try to say anything more specific than that.
Okay, so in the same way that the Kuthumi said, don't worship us, if Jesus, the Nazarene or Yeshua, if he could speak to us, I suspect he too would be saying, hey, don't worship me. That, I realize that's a heretical thing. My Baptist background says it's completely heretical, but I bet that each of these people came here to be world teachers, but not to form a religion.
Jesus said that in the Gospels. Yeah. You know, why callest thou me good? There is none good save God. I mean, you know, he was, I mean, I think it's about as obvious as it could be, given that the Gospels are written in fairly plain language, that he did repudiate it. And why don't they pay attention to that? Because it's hard to see something that you don't want to see, even if it's right in front of your face. So yes, of course, I would agree with you with that.
Yeah. And that Rome needed a religion too. You know, as part of it is that they needed to replace things and do what they did. So it was also a politically motivated religion, I think. But yeah.
Well, René Guénon, who's a famous French esotericist, had a view that, which I neither, again, agree with nor disagree with, that Christianity was originally an esoteric religion, kind of like a mystery cult, but that the Greco-Roman paganism was so degenerate that it kind of had to step in a way that probably wasn't really ready for. And I think that would explain a lot if true. Anyone else? Hey, why don't you let me ask you a question? All of you. I'm curious, like, your impressions of the national headquarters of the TS, the leadership, what it's doing, what it's not doing, what it should be doing. I'd just be curious about that. It's an open-ended question because, there's sometimes possibly maybe the interaction between the national organization and the local lodges may not be what it could be. I don't know. I'd just be interested in your impressions on this from any and all of you.
I am relatively new to the Theosophical Society, so I have no opinion because I don't know what all they do. I don't know, I don't know what's there. I've never been to the headquarters, so I don't know how to answer that.
Okay.
Let's see, who else here?
Yeah, I'd like to comment that I've been to the national headquarters several times, or actually more than several times. And just wish I'd lived closer. I really enjoy just the, I would say the ambiance, if you will. I like to go spend time in the library. And the library to me is just like a sacred place there. And when I'm there, I usually walk the grounds and, I don't make any waves or anything like that, but just, I stop either on the way to visit my daughter who lives outside of Chicago, or on the way back, depending on the travel. But I just, as far as what the leadership is doing, I don't know. I'll further comment that when I get my Quest magazine, I really enjoy reading your column, Richard. That's something I look forward to. Primarily because you don't seem dogmatic to me. I guess that's really important. Let me ask you: have you ever been to Adyar?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
And that is the truth. I took a trip to India in 1985, and I was traveling with a friend of mine, and she really wanted to go to the Theosophical Society and visit it. I didn't really know much about it. I really wasn't interested, but we were in the area, so we took a cab, and we got to Adyar, and it was after 5, so it was closed. So that's as close as I've ever gotten. So I can honestly say yes and no.
I visited one day, and one of the most intriguing things is my driver couldn't figure out where the entrance was, and he was asking people, and nobody knew where it was. So I just I got out and I approached a gentleman who was reasonably well dressed, and asked him directly. He said, "Yeah, I was just over there as the entrance." And I spent about I'm assuming she's not alive anymore, but there's a woman named, I think it was Mary Anderson, who was a secretary. I spent some time talking to her, and we walked the grounds. And I let the driver come along with me, and I know he thought that was just a fantastic experience for him. But it's quite an interesting place.
It is. Well, actually, one reason we were late is that we're kind of downtown Madras, as it was then called, and we had to ask several cab drivers before we found one who actually knew where it was. Whatever that's worth. But that wasn't one reason we were late. Not perhaps the only reason. I probably could have gotten an earlier start. Well, good. That's very interesting.
And I will comment that just walked into the library, spent about 20 minutes in the library, and that was kind of a spiritual thing. I can just imagine, the collection of that Blavatsky and other people put together, and what's like how you put it, what is there in the stacks has to be extremely interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of artifacts. I mean, we have a lot in our archives at Alcott. As in most archives, I don't really see very much of it, but there is a lot of fascinating material, but I'm sure there's much more in Adyar.
For those of us that are new, where is the national headquarters?
It is in Wheaton, Illinois, which is about 25 miles due west of Chicago.
Okay, thank you.
And it's basically, 42 acres. The property was quiet. Well, the main building was built in 1926 and been there since. When it was built, it was obviously farm country, but now it's, part of the general western suburbs of Chicagoland. I mean, I live about 3.5 miles west of there myself. But yeah, it's most people have enjoyed their time there. The grounds are nice. It's just become an arboretum. Did any of you know that? Well, it was designated a class 1 arboretum. What makes you an arboretum? The number of tree species you have on your property. There are enough tree species on our property to be a class 1 arboretum. I mean, I think it might mean they can get a couple more grants or something like that. But it is a very nice property. It is a very nice property. My office, for those of you who are familiar with it, is in the new building in the back of the Quest Bookshop, rather than in the main building. But it's a pretty nice office.
Richard, in terms of responding to your original question, I've been there several times. I've been to meetings here in Minneapolis, and I first met you down in the Ozark Mountains when you came down there for a presentation.
It's a beautiful spot.
Some years ago. And the things that impressed me about, first, it's a traditional building in Wheaton, and very nice, very comfortable, and nothing modernistic. The other thing I like about it is the bookstore that's there. While it's not really large, it's interesting and fun to go in. The library, as Wallace said, is impressive, and the people there are very accommodating. And of course, everybody in the building is accommodating. And they just take everything for granted that everybody's going to be nice to you. And being an ex-sailor, it's, fun to have everybody nice to you. You get different, I've been exposed to different kinds of society. But I like your work too. I think the Quest magazine is marvelous. And I look forward to getting it every month or whenever. And,
yeah, I mean, being quite frank, like every group of people, there's some you like better than others, some get on your nerves, so on, so on. But I will say that, pretty much everyone there, really does their best to live up to what I would consider to be some extremely high values and kind of make that quite clear in their work and their dealings with people. So I think that's true. We have just restored these murals. If those of you who've been there will know that in the front lobby of the big building, there are these murals. They were painted in 1930, and which means that they need some restoration work, and that's just been done. So might be something to check into on your next visit. But it is, and I'm very grateful to have the library. It certainly saves me from buying any number of books. Oh, good. Well, I will pass those comments on.
I have a comment. I have so appreciated the classes that we can get in on, and I just have gone, to the website and just stalked everything. I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm looking at that, and I appreciate the archive, that there's so much to get at, and the depth and the breadth, and it's extremely mind-blowing, but for someone who loves to learn and know more, I have just loved it. I also have had really good help from, we were figuring out our website, and someone helped me so much with that. And everyone has been so kind. It just really stands out. We've gotten help for, like connecting with you in all kinds of different ways. And I also just am so honored that you are here. I just had to say that I'm really honored that you spoke to us tonight. And, our group is probably, maybe a little smaller because we're not meeting in person, but I think the Zoom opportunity is that we can pull in people from all over if we do, sometimes we do. So it's a blessing and a challenge to be isolated, but we're, we just are going to try and keep growing. And I just appreciate you being here, and this was fascinating. Thank you.
Yes, I enjoyed my visit to you and to Minneapolis, and I think it was close to 3 years ago. My memory is November 18, but who knows how right that is. But I did very much enjoy that visit, and I certainly enjoyed meeting everyone there.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose time to wrap things up. Any more questions?
Anyone else? Did we lose Vaughn?
No, I just want
You're
to.
here, you're just listening. Okay.
You're listening to every word, and so, like you, Hope, so grateful that Richard was able to join us. It was 3 years ago. At that time, we were meeting in the basement of the Liberal Catholic Church, which unfortunately now is closed. And we've been more recently meeting in the Midway area of St. Paul, the Grigg Midway building. But it was, I believe it was in about 3 years ago that Richard visited. I remember that very well. And yes, I remember when I was in Wheaton at the headquarters, and at that time we were trying very hard to establish what we called field work and getting the lodges and study groups across the country all connected better, because it seemed to be like you were either had a direct line to the national or you were meeting locally at no connection to the national. And see, I think things have really changed. And what really changed was in Wheaton, they've set up so many programs on the website, so many, webinars and lectures and archived programs and other resources that are available, classes. And of course, books, that are available through the lending library at the Olcott Research Center. Fabulous resource. So we would certainly encourage people to go to the national website, explore that. And if you can, time to time we put together a group of people for a road trip, and maybe we're due for that again. There's the summer convention and there's the fall fair in October. And so, I mean, really, we've had nothing but excellent support from Wheaton as a lodge in recent years, particularly in helping us set up programs and giving us some direction and help. A lot of it technological, because not as swift as our friend Hope there running these programs. So I would like to thank you, Richard. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. You know, we're always happy when you join us. Please go to our links that we put in the chat room. You want to like copy them, I think, and write them into a Word program or something so that you don't lose them, because they'll disappear when our images on Zoom when this broadcast ends. So you want to like highlight them now and know what's coming ahead as far as programming in the fall, and our links. And one of those links, of course, is the national link, theosophical.org. When you join the National Lodge, we've made it a factor that you would automatically get free membership in our local Minneapolis Lodge if you so choose to participate in the Minneapolis Lodge. So that's how important we consider our allegiance to the national. We're one of the 5 lodges that stayed during the big Pasadena split. So thank you all for coming. Please come back.
Well,
And I'll
thank you
be-
to say thank you. And it was a pleasure to chat with all of you. And I hope you have a wonderful night.
Thank